Hey guys, tonight we step into a world of dust and sandals where bread is baked on hot stones and your neighbors might be plotting to steal your donkey or your dignity. You're a woman in ancient Judea, and believe me, just surviving the walk to the well without getting accused of sorcery or seduction is a miracle. The sun is unforgiving, the streets are unforgiving, and oh, your mother-in-law, she's the Old Testament kind. You probably wouldn't survive this if God wasn't low-key babysitting your every move. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You're carrying a clay jar because of course you are. It's your third trip today and the water still tastes like yesterday's sheep. As you pass the market, a child dashes past you screaming about someone spilling figs. You glance sideways just in time to see a bartering woman swing her heavy basket out into the walkway. One more second and you'd have clay shards and a busted eyebrow. But you don't. You duck, instinctively, effortlessly, like someone whispered to your feet before your brain caught up. It happens often. The pottery never breaks in your hands. The snake never bites you. The wrong man never quite convinces you. You're not smarter. You're not even paying that much attention sometimes. You just, move the right way at the right time. There was that one time when you almost sold your weaving to the sweet-talking linen merchant with those two white teeth, right? But then your neighbor suddenly needed your help with a lamb birth and poof. The man disappeared along with the wedding ring. You now realize he probably stole from some Roman widow. Historians still argue whether women in Bible times had actual legal recourse against such men. Spoiler, they usually didn't. Yet somehow, even in a world where men owned everything, including the story you keep slipping past, the pages of tragedy. You notice it at home too. The family quarrel, the shouting match that almost dragged you in. You just so happened to be out collecting reeds. The storm that flattened tents in your village, yours held barely because your child had earlier dragged you out to chase a butterfly. A butterfly. It's not luck, it's choreography. And you, dear one, are dancing with someone invisible. Now let's not pretend it feels magical. It's subtle. Like when everyone's gossiping around the olive press and you catch the tiniest raise of an eyebrow from the woman in purple so you know to keep silent. That one choice saves you from being the scapegoat 2 days later. A quirky fact here. Did you know some ancient women painted protective symbols on the insides of their sandals? Some even hid tiny scriptures in the folds of their tunics. You don't need symbols. You've got timing. Protection that doesn't show off but shows up. Still, the protection isn't always convenient. Sometimes it ruins your plans. That journey you canceled at the last minute because the cartwheel cracked, you later heard raiders hit the road you would have been on. That heartbreak that crushed your rib cage for 3 harvest cycles. He ended up marrying the tax collector's daughter. Enough said. And remember, back then, women didn't have the luxury of walking away from bad decisions easily. One wrong partnership could mean death or exile to some goat hair tent at the edge of Jericho. So every moment you don't walk into disaster, that's divine protection in slow motion. You may think I just got lucky again, but no. You dodged what others walk into. You stepped around the trap. You didn't even see the net, but somehow your foot found a safe patch of earth. Even now, sitting under your modest canopy at dusk, you might feel the day brushing off your shoulders like flour. But notice how whole you are. Notice how the chaos swirled around you and never quite touched your core. You're not untouchable. You're just covered. Like that time at the town well when the woman next to you whispered venom about your cousin marrying a Gentile. Your silence, it didn't feel noble. It felt frozen. But hours later, your cousin came sobbing to you, thanking you for not joining the pile-on. Turns out her Gentile husband gifted her land in Galilee. And your silence kept the door open. Protection isn't just escape, it's preparation. God isn't just saving you from bad things. He's saving you for better ones. It's a strange favor, unseen, unflaunted. But it's there. You dodge what others walk into. You sit quietly at the weaving circle, the spindle humming against your calloused fingers. Around you chatter flutters like sparrows whose husband brought back the wrong herbs, whose son caught a fever, whose daughter looked too long at the Roman soldier on the hill. You hum softly, listening and not listening, because what you're really hearing isn't being said. You've always had a way of tuning into the unsaid, the unsung. You notice the pause before someone speaks, the tension behind a smile, the way a woman touches her braid when she's holding back tears. You hear the language between the lines, the truth folded beneath polite bread offerings and mumbled, "God be praised." The prophets may have had visions, but you've got a kind of sonar. Not the loud miracles, just the quiet radar of a soul tuned in to something divine. It shows up in strange ways. You look at a new visitor in town, sharp sandals, soft voice, and somehow you know she's here running from something. You glance at your friend's new fiancé and feel that microscopic twinge in your gut, like a camel refusing to drink from a poison well. You try to shake it, you do, because you weren't raised to assume, but still your inner warning bell has rung more times than you can count, and most of the time it's right. Even if you say nothing, your heart files it away. Historians still argue whether women in biblical villages formed formal support groups or whether those were simply intuitive alliances. But you know better. You've seen women move like flocks, no words, just shared looks, and the quiet shifting of loyalties. That woman no one trusted anymore. They never said anything. She just started getting fewer invitations. And it wasn't cruelty, it was instinct. Sometimes spirit moves without a scroll. You once overheard your aunt say, "That girl can smell a lie faster than a jackal smells meat." It was meant as a compliment. Sort of. You were only 9. And yet here you are years later helping a neighbor choose between 2 tradesmen for her vineyard wall. She holds up both contracts, both scribbled with identical promises. But you glance once at the second man's sandals, too new, his tunic too white, his handshake too firm. You nudge her gently toward the first man who stutters but sweats like an honest man. She listens. A month later, her vineyard still stands. The next one over collapsed with stolen silver and an empty granary. Sometimes you wonder how you know. You don't hear voices. You don't have dreams with talking donkeys. But when something's off, the air bends different. The light tints a little wrong. The pit of your stomach tugs like a mule refusing to budge. And it's not just with people. You hear it in decisions too. You once felt a thick stillness just before signing that loan parchment. You tore it up, felt foolish doing it. But later the lender was caught in a bribery scandal and your neighbor lost her goats because of him. Protection doesn't always look like thunder. Sometimes it's just a whisper. This doesn't feel right. A quirky detail here, some biblical women carried bits of cloth with symbolic knots. Little prayers for wisdom tied into their belts. Not spells, not charms, just reminders. You don't need knots. You've got something deeper, a sensitivity that doesn't make sense but saves you all the same. Still, it's not always easy, because the burden of sensing things before they happen can feel lonely. You see the storm coming and no one believes you. You pull back from a friendship and they call you cold. You bite your tongue during the group discussion and get labeled aloof. But then 2 moons later, when the truth leaks like oil from a cracked jug, you remember why you stepped back. You hear what isn't said. You hear what others drown out. And let's be real, sometimes you wish you couldn't. Life would be simpler. You envy the carefree ones, the easily charmed, the ones who giggle and trust and get burned and do it again. But you keep watch. You smile with caution. You nod with intent. Even that one time when a traveling scholar tried to flirt with you under the guise of spiritual enlightenment, you felt the manipulation. It came wrapped in honeyed words and compliments about your discernment, but you heard the clink of pride beneath it, the craving to be worshipped, the need to be adored, and you stepped away before your name became another tale for the village fire. There's protection in your perception, not just physical but emotional. relational, spiritual. You don't just dodge danger, you recognize it in disguise. And while others call it gut feeling, you know what it is. It's the mercy of a God who lets you hear things before they hurt. You hear what isn't said. You knead the dough with practiced hands, the flour sticking to your wrists like desert fog. The morning sun drapes itself across your doorway, warm but already a little arrogant, like it knows today is going to be difficult. Your neighbor's baby is wailing, the goat across the alley sounds sick again, and the lentils refuse to soften. You're tired, not because something went wrong, but because nothing did. And still you're standing. It's strange, isn't it? Others crumble. Others are overwhelmed, unravel, go quiet for days. But you somehow, impossibly, you're still on your feet. You're not the strongest, not the most spiritual. You haven't fasted in 3 moons, and you may or may not have threatened to slap a teenager yesterday. But here you are, steady as the oil lamp. You've seen worse days than this. Remember when your cousin's husband vanished with a caravan and left her with 5 children and no inheritance? Everyone thought she'd break. And she did for a while. But she came to you. And together you stitched tunics and sold jars and survived what no woman should face alone. People whispered about her, but you never moved. You stayed, you held space, and somehow you helped her stand too. Historians still debate how much informal leadership women held in ancient homes, whether they shaped the culture from inside the walls or only survived it. But you've always known the world's spine isn't forged by kings. It's bent by women who carry children and grief at the same time and still get the bread to rise. You've had moments, deep ones, when it all should have broken you. The betrayal that split your chest open like a cracked clay pot. The illness that stole half your energy for an entire season. That time you lost someone and had to keep serving soup while everyone cried on your floor, but still you lit the lamp. You folded the cloth. You remembered the names of those who forgot yours, not because you're numb, but because something steadies you from the inside. And maybe you don't always recognize it, but others do. They ask how you're not weeping in the street like Miriam did last harvest. You don't have an answer. Not really, you just woke up, stood up, and did the next thing. A fringe belief from that era. Some said women who survived repeated hardship had been touched by an angel. Others whispered that they'd been cursed and just didn't know it yet. Because strength scared people then, especially in women. Still does. But you're not scary. You're just grounded. Your roots go deeper than people see. And when the winds howl, you bend, never snap. Remember that food shortage a while back? The one that emptied the village's grain stores and had men yelling in the square. You still had bread. Not much, but enough to share. Not because of magic, just quiet choices you made before the storm. You kept oil from 3 presses ago. You stored flour in jars no one remembered. You listened when God said, just a little more. And you don't tell people, but you talk to him when no one's around. Not with fancy words, just mutterings. Sighs. The kind of prayers that happen between sweeping and soaking lentils. The strength you carry isn't loud. It doesn't march. It doesn't boast. It stays. And that's what evil hates the most: consistency. The schemers, the manipulators, the gossips, they want easy targets. Collapsible souls. Women who break after one harsh winter or one cruel rumor. But you don't fall like they expect. You may cry, yes. You may doubt. But you get up again, brush off the ashes and boil the water. That's not willpower. That's being held. You've felt it in the darkest hours. When your child burned with fever and no herbs worked. When your best friend grew cold and you didn't know why. When you sat by the empty fire pit and begged for a reason to keep going. And somehow you did. And people noticed. They might not say it to your face, but they tell each other. She's stronger than she looks. She never quits. I don't know how she's still standing. Well, you do. It's not that you're made of stone. It's that you've been fortified by grace. You don't realize how many people lean on your endurance, how many take courage from your calm. They don't thank you, not always, but they watch, they copy. They come to you with quiet tears and sideways questions, and you give them what God gave you, presence. And here's the miracle: you still smile. You still dance a little when the fig trees bloom. You still laugh when the goat sneezes and scares the children. Because this isn't survival, it's strength, given not earned, invisible but undeniable. You stay standing when others fall. The courtyard fills with voices, neighbors talking, sandals scraping stone, the occasional cluck of a wandering chicken someone forgot to pen up. You sit by the basin rinsing herbs in the morning light when you feel it again, that prickly stillness. Someone walks by too slow. Their eyes linger a half-second longer than manners allow. Their greeting is sweet, but the corners of their mouth don't match their words. And suddenly you know. Evil gets uncomfortable around you. It's not something you wear on your sleeve. You don't quote verses loudly or stand in the marketplace throwing spiritual elbows. No, you simply exist in a way that unsettles the darkness. You've seen it. The way certain people get visibly tense around you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because they know deep down that their tricks won't work on you, that their usual charm doesn't land, that the performance they're so proud of gets no applause from your spirit. It's subtle but unmistakable. The gossip stops when you enter the room, not because they respect you, let's not flatter them, but because they can't manipulate the air the same way when you're near. The control, the fear, the slithering tones, they unravel under your presence. Historians still argue whether certain women in ancient times were seen as discerners or just difficult. There's a fine line, they say. But you don't care what they call you. You've seen the looks, the sighs, the way people clear their throat, like they just swallowed something sour when you ask one too many direct questions. You remember that man at the well? Oh yes, him. The one with the traveling stall full of rare spices and even rarer compliments. He made every woman giggle except you. You smiled, nodded, and offered no interest. He called you cold. Days later, he was gone, and so was someone's bracelet. Funny how that works. There's a rumor that evil can't stand pure light, that those who walk in deception will always twitch when touched by honesty, even if it's unspoken. And maybe that's why they don't stick around you. It's not just people, it's situations. You've been invited to things that mysteriously get canceled. You've been spared from the surprise meetings that ended up being ambushes. Once a woman tried to trick you into co-signing for a land deal, but your hand cramped before you signed. Literally, like your own body joined heaven in saying absolutely not. A quirky little detail from biblical village life: women sometimes carried small stones engraved with sacred symbols sewn into their belts, not for luck, but for quiet protection. You don't need stones. You've got spirit. You remember that woman who always smiled too much until she didn't. The one who tried to pit you against your sister-in-law with cleverly dropped phrases like, "She said she didn't like your cooking." You didn't take the bait. You simply said, "Well, that makes two of us," and walked away. The look on her face like she swallowed a lemon dipped in vinegar. You don't lash out. You don't fight back. But something in you unsettles those who deal in shadow. They prefer easy prey, the easily flattered, the easily enraged. You are neither. You once stood in a circle of women discussing marriage. One of them, shiny-eyed, opinionated, and clearly infatuated with her own wisdom, mocked the quiet woman beside you. Said her silence made her useless. You turned, looked at her, and said, "She listens better than most prophets." You didn't mean to sound threatening, but she never made eye contact with you again. There's a protection that comes not just from avoiding evil, but from repelling it. You've walked into rooms and felt the energy shift. You've joined conversations and watched the tone change. You've prayed quietly and watched tension dissolve without explanation. And it's not always comfortable. Sometimes people don't like you, and you don't know why. Sometimes they avoid you, exclude you, mislabel you. But deep down you understand evil doesn't want to be exposed, and you carry too much truth in your bones to keep things cozy. Still, you don't weaponize it. You're not here to be feared. You're here to be faithful. That's why you hum while grinding herbs. That's why you laugh with children and kiss the elderly on their foreheads. You're not obsessed with casting shadows out. You just leave no room for them. Evil doesn't know what to do with that. You once walked into a household where jealousy had been brewing for weeks, sisters tearing at each other over inheritance. They asked you to mediate, but when you entered, no one spoke for half a minute. Just silence. As if your presence embarrassed the bitterness. And you didn't even say much. You simply reminded them how their father loved to watch them dance together as girls. One sister cried. The other left the room. The inheritance was split evenly 2 days later. That's what it means to carry divine protection, not just from evil, but against it. You don't need to win battles. You just need to show up fully anchored. And the darkness, it retreats. Evil gets uncomfortable around you. It always stings a little when someone walks away that you thought would stay. You're sweeping out the corner of your home when the memory hits again. That laugh, that shared meal, that promise whispered behind the fig trees. Gone now, like footprints in windblown sand. You lose people you thought were forever. It's a cruel kind of mercy. The exit isn't always explosive. Sometimes it's just slow. A quiet fading, the friend who starts replying with shorter words, the cousin who no longer visits after market, the neighbor who used to bring you herbs and now looks past you like your name's been wiped from her tongue. And yet deep inside something whispers, let them go. You don't always know why. In fact, most of the time you ache for answers that never come. But after the ache settles, after the long walk back from disappointment, you start to notice something. You're lighter. Historians still argue whether women in early communities were emotionally codependent on kinship ties or whether they formed secret networks of resilience. What they forget is that grief teaches clarity, and you, dear one, have learned to see who was sent and who was allowed only for a season. You once cried for 3 days over a friend who ghosted you after a small misunderstanding. You blamed yourself, replayed every sentence. But months later, you overheard her spinning lies about you in a courtyard 2 towns over. Lies that would have dug into your name like a rusted dagger if she'd still been close. God's edits aren't always elegant. Sometimes he tears the page mid-sentence. Like that man you loved. Yes, him. The one who said he'd build a home with you near the vineyard. He made promises with eyes too kind to be trusted. But something in you tightened every time he touched your wrist, like even your pulse refused to match his rhythm. When he left without a word, it nearly broke you. But a year later, the truth arrived in rumors and confirmed letters. He wasn't a home builder. He was a collector of hearts and debts. And still you were spared. There's something sacred in the way people fall away from you. Not because you're cursed, because you're covered. You don't realize it at first. You just feel the vacancy, the air too quiet where laughter used to bloom. But later when you see the traps you might have stepped into the webs you narrowly missed, you begin to thank God for the subtractions. A fringe belief from your grandmother's time, she used to say, when someone exits without reason, they were never part of your anointing. You used to roll your eyes. Now you light a candle for her wisdom. You once had a group of women who gathered every week to discuss scripture, seasons, and sorrows. One by one they changed, grew colder, talked over you, rolled eyes when you spoke. You blamed yourself, thought maybe your voice cracked too often or your prayers sounded unsure. Then one day you stopped going, quietly, without drama, and peace followed. You learned that forced circles aren't holy ones, and that sometimes God closes doors you're too polite to lock yourself. There was that aunt who used to praise you in public and belittle you in private. You forgave her dozens of times, but the last time something shifted. Your heart hardened not in cruelty, but in clarity. She called you cold. You said nothing. She never returned. And still you flourished. It feels like loss, but it's pruning. A gardener doesn't ask the vine how it feels when she cuts it. She just knows that dead weight must go for the fruit to grow. You remember, don't you, how you once tried to chase after someone who left your feet blistered, your throat cracked from calling their name, but they didn't look back, and you eventually stopped running, and something strange happened. The ground beneath your feet grew fertile. You built something there, planted something new, and it grew. And now when someone drifts, when the silence grows longer than the invitation list, you don't panic. You pause. You ask not, why are they leaving, but what are you making space for? Because every departure cleared a path. Every sudden absence created quiet. And in that quiet, your discernment sharpened. Your spirit stretched. Your roots dug deep. You are not abandoned. You are being shaped. And you're starting to see it who belongs, who was just passing through, who left to make room for better. You lose people you thought were forever. And yet somehow you're still whole. You don't know what you did to deserve the glare. You're walking back from the well, just a jug of water on your shoulder and a song under your breath when you catch it, the sharp look from a rooftop. It slices through you like a cold fig knife. No greeting, no smile, just that squint of disapproval as if you committed some sacred violation by existing peacefully. And yet, later that night as the village sleeps, her goat stops screaming. The same goat that kept her awake for 5 nights. And you prayed for her, silently, with no audience. You get unfairly disliked, then mysteriously protected. It's a strange pattern, one you've seen enough times to stop being surprised. Someone takes issue with you without reason. They roll their eyes when you speak, twist your words, tell others you're too this or too that. And you stay quiet, not because you're weak, but because you've learned that God defends in ways more elegant than revenge. Historians debate whether ancient communities had unspoken hierarchies among women if jealousy and resentment were woven into the very structure of shared labor. All you know is this: favor attracts flies. And sometimes the ones biting you most aren't strangers. They're familiar faces with slowly shifting tones. You once helped a woman through her hardest season, sat with her in grief, brought her olive cakes when she couldn't lift her head. Then suddenly nothing. She stopped speaking to you. You heard the rumors. She said you were too proud, that your joy made others feel small. And still, when her youngest fell sick, you left herbs on her doorstep at dawn. You didn't do it to impress. You did it because her child mattered more than her opinion. And somehow in return, you found yourself protected. That one evening when half the village came down with stomach fever after eating from the same pot you were spared. Not because you were smart, you'd simply been delayed by a spilled jar of lentils, or so you thought. A quirky superstition in your village said that women with unexplained grace must be hiding something. Some accused them of secret charms or silent spells. But you're not hiding anything. You just have someone who sees what others miss. You once walked into a gathering where tension hung thick as overripe dates. A woman you barely knew whispered your name with a smile too smooth. She had plans, an ambush cloaked in sweetness. But before she could deliver her cutting words, a child ran up and spilled wine all over her lap. The conversation scattered. The moment passed. You laughed later, not out loud, but in your soul, because you've seen it before. A letter that never arrives, a snide remark cut off by a distraction, an unfair accusation that's suddenly disproven by a forgotten witness. It's divine interference. You don't always see it in the moment. Sometimes it takes weeks to realize the full circle. The snub that led you to a different opportunity. The rejection that opened a better door. The person who unfriended you only to be replaced by someone whose presence feels like sunlight in winter. And let's talk about the protection that's internal too. There are words that should have broken you but didn't. There are rejections that should have poisoned you but somehow you healed. There are seasons where people tried to tear you down and yet you still stand with your name intact. It's not pride, it's preservation. You once offered help to a woman known for turning kindness into leverage. Everyone warned you, but your heart was clear. She tried to twist your gesture, make it seem like you owed her. For a while it worked. Then unexpectedly someone spoke up. Defended you. A voice you didn't even know was paying attention. And just like that, the narrative shifted. You don't fight with fists, you fight with presence, and God, He fights for you in places you'll never see. Remember the woman from earlier, the one with the rooftop glare? She came to you weeks later, broken, desperate, her words caught in her throat. She never apologized, not directly, but she asked for help, and you gave it. Because you're not here to keep score. You're here to keep shining. You get disliked, misunderstood, judged without cause, but then somehow mysteriously you're protected. Opportunities fall into your lap. Harm misses you by inches. People who tried to ruin your name lose interest without explanation. And through it all, your heart stays soft, because you know who's doing the defending. You get unfairly disliked, then mysteriously protected. The roof leaks again. The wheat you stored smells faintly of mildew. The neighbor's baby has been crying for hours, and the olive oil jar tipped over in the middle of the night, leaving a slick puddle by the hearth. And yet, you breathe out, and it's not panic that rises. It's peace. You feel a strange peace when you shouldn't. It doesn't make sense. Not really. Anyone watching your life from the outside might assume you're one frayed thread away from collapsing. But you're not. You're tired, yes. Sometimes bone tired. But there's this quiet, unshakable calm curled in your belly like a resting dove. You once heard a merchant's wife say, either she's in denial or she's blessed. You didn't correct her. You just kept humming while hanging up your linens. Because deep down you know it's not denial. It's design. Historians often debate whether ancient Hebrew women were allowed to express full emotional ranges or were culturally conditioned to endure in silence. But you found your own rhythm. You cry when no one's watching, sure. You scream into the grain sacks sometimes. But what returns afterward is never despair. It's steadiness. It's like Hannah at the temple, whispering prayers through tears, moving her lips without sound, everyone thinking she was drunk, but God listening anyway. You've been there, in your own way. Peace like that doesn't come from your circumstances. It comes despite them. You once had 3 things go wrong. In a single day, your son bloodied his knee, your cousin insulted your cooking, and your favorite tunic got stained with pomegranate juice. And yet that evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, you sat by the fig tree and felt content. A neighbor passed by, shocked to see you smiling. She asked if you'd finally had good news. You shook your head, just good quiet. That kind of peace can't be taught. It's granted. You don't even know when it first appeared. Maybe after your hardest heartbreak, or that year you buried more than one dream. It crept in like dew on morning stones, soft, unnoticed, but unmistakable once you touched it. You no longer need every answer. You no longer beg for why. You've learned to sit in the not knowing and trust that even silence has a shepherd. There's a quirky little folk tale passed down by the older women that true peace smells like warm clay and time. Not incense, not ritual, just something grounded and ordinary. You've come to believe it, because when peace visits you, it smells like bread. It sounds like a distant goat bell. It feels like your own heartbeat slowing down. And you've noticed something else. People come to you now when their storms rage. They think you'll fix it. You don't. You just sit with them, pour something warm, and offer that strange calm you've been given. They cry, they vent, they spiral, and then somehow they breathe easier. You never claim to have answers, but the peace in you passes from your eyes to their chest like a cup passed quietly in the dark. Remember when your friend lost her husband suddenly? Everyone flitted around like startled birds. You just sat beside her, weaving silently. She didn't speak for hours, but when she finally did, her first words were, "Thank you for not making me talk." That's the kind of peace you carry. Not loud, not polished, just present, and it protects you too. You've had chances to lash out, to prove points, to win arguments. But peace nudges you to stay quiet, to step back. And almost always you're grateful afterward. One time you nearly confronted a woman who had twisted your words into something venomous. You rehearsed the speech in your head, but just before you spoke, you felt at that stillness, that holy hesitation. You walked away. Days later, she apologized. Sometimes God's protection doesn't push, it softens. He doesn't silence the storm, He wraps your spirit in something stronger. And people can't explain it. They say you're so calm. You don't seem worried. I wish I had your faith. But it's not something you carry. It carries you. Through unpaid debts, through difficult seasons, through illness that drags on, and goodbyes that never got closure. You've learned to drink from peace like it's a hidden stream. And yes, you still struggle. You still wish things were different sometimes. But the weight doesn't crush you, it cradles you. You feel a strange peace when you shouldn't. And it's more than enough. It's barely dawn, and you're already moving, sweeping the floor, soaking lentils, folding that one shawl that never seems to dry right. There's nothing heroic about your morning. No trumpet sound, no audience. Just you, a clay cup, and the quiet hum of duty. But something holy is happening. Your quiet choices shake loud kingdoms. You don't feel powerful. Not with flour on your elbows and your child's tunic half mended on your lap. But somewhere in realms you can't see, your small yes echoes like thunder. Your refusal to gossip, your decision not to retaliate, your generosity when no one sees. These things tilt unseen scales. Historians still wonder how much influence women truly had in ancient households if their decisions could ripple beyond the home. But you already know the answer. Every kindness, every act of restraint, every prayer whispered into your apron, something stirs. You remember a day like this, just as plain. A woman you barely knew stopped by to borrow salt. She seemed rushed, distracted. You invited her to sit, poured her some barley tea. She wept into it. You didn't ask questions, just listened. Later you learned she was on her way to leave her family. She didn't. She never said your name when telling the story. But you knew, and God knew. Sometimes your gentleness rewrites chapters you'll never read. You once gave away your last piece of honeyed bread to a boy whose mother was ill. The next day someone left a basket of figs at your door. Coincidence, maybe. But it happened more than once. You've become familiar with this divine exchange you give quietly, and heaven moves loudly. There's a fringe belief among desert travelers that the wind listens to women who sing while they work. It's poetic nonsense, probably. But still, when you hum those old psalms while washing garments, the day really does feel softer. It's the same feeling that came when you refused to join that heated argument last month. They baited you, tried to pull you into the drama. You could have said something clever, something righteous. Instead, you smiled, blessed them, and left. And the whole situation dissolved 2 days later. No one gave you credit, but you felt it, the stillness that followed like a storm dodge. You don't need to be center stage to change the atmosphere. That one moment you chose forgiveness instead of revenge, you think it went unnoticed, but it didn't. The bitterness stopped with you. A whole generation might never taste it now. You once found yourself standing at a crossroads, literally. A traveler was lost. You stopped even though you were running late, gave directions, offered water. Weeks later, a merchant passed through and said, "Someone told me the kindest woman lives in this village." He brought spices, just left them at the edge of your mat. Again, not magic, just impact. The truth is, heaven leans in when you make godly choices without applause. You've learned to choose peace when your voice trembles with withheld anger, to choose silence when your name's on someone's careless tongue, to choose service when you feel forgotten. And it shakes things. Remember Esther. She made one quiet request in a royal dining room and saved a nation. You may not be wearing silk or dining with kings, but your table is still a battlefield, and your softness is still a sword. You prayed once, nothing fancy, just a plea for someone else's child. You found out months later that the fever broke that same night. You gave bread to a widow. She smiled. That same week, her son got work in a nearby village. You lent your shawl to a woman who walked alone to the healer. She came back saying, "I felt safe, like someone was walking with me." They call it coincidence. You call it kingdom logic, because God's math doesn't add up in the usual way. One small act, one hidden sacrifice, one moment of faithfulness, and the ripple travels. You don't get thanked much, but you don't do it for thanks. You do it because something inside you refuses to believe that good is wasted. And you're right. Every seed you plant grows in places you'll never see. Every kind word echoes in someone's midnight hour. Every boundary you hold becomes a blueprint for someone else's freedom. You're not loud. You're not famous. But kingdoms shift when you move in obedience. Your quiet choices shake loud kingdoms.